I learned how betrayal tastes before I ever learned how to breathe freely. The conquered kingdom had a pulse, even after the gates fell, an ache under the stones, a ghost in every corridor. I was a princess in a place where princesses were meant to be proof of someone else's victory. When my father died under a banner that no longer belonged to us, the court songs stopped. They didn't stop because the music was gone. They stopped because people were afraid of sounding like themselves. After Kyle Tharos took my home, he called it mercy. He said the world was changing, that the weak had to learn to bend, that conquest was simply the shape of survival. He never spoke my name like it mattered. He never needed to. The soldiers used it instead. The last princess, the captive heir, the bargaining piece. The only thing they never called me was mine. In the first months, they kept me alive with rituals. A meal arrived at dawn with a guard at the door. A bath was allowed at noon with the same guard watching like water could carry escape. If I smiled too long, someone would laugh to remind me that my face was a performance. If I cried, they said I should be grateful they didn't leave me to rot. And I did what women were trained to do even before the conquests survive, quietly. I learned the kitchens by heart, not because I loved cooking, but because kitchens were where the kingdom's last truth survived. People were hungry, and hunger made them honest. I traded my needlework for extra bowls. I learned which herb dried the bitterness out of bad meat, and which root eased pain when the healers were too tired to pretend they still believed. I didn't fight, I didn't curse, I listened. When the new king's captains brought their wounded into the keep, I watched the way their hands shook when they thought no one could see. Their armor hid broken bones, but nothing hid the fear that came after battle. I stitched what I could. I cleaned wounds until they stopped smelling like old blood. I hummed softly while I worked, not because I wanted anyone to hear, but because the rhythm kept my thoughts from turning into knives. It made the soldiers uncomfortable, not because I was kind, because kindness means you still belong to yourself, and belonging was a crime in a conquered land. Kyle Tharos visited rarely. When he did, the air tightened as if the castle itself had learned to flinch. People called him an Alpha King, like it was a title that explained everything and forgave nothing. His presence did more than command. His presence rearranged the world. Torches burned too steady. Shadows stayed where they were told. His guard captain once said he had a beast inside him. Not metaphorical, not poetic. A real thing, a presence that pressed against his ribs like a second heart. I'd never seen it clearly. I only felt it, an invisible pressure in the hallways when Kyle Tharos walked past. The hairs on my arms rose as though my body wanted to kneel without asking permission. The court was full of whispers about what conquest had done to him. Some said the Alpha King was merciful to captives. Others insisted he tortured slowly, that he liked watching fear bloom in women and then shrink into obedience. I didn't believe either story. I believed what I saw, and what I saw was this. His wolves did not enter the kitchens, not even the curious ones. They waited outside, like he had ordered silence from the world. When I carried broth through the corridors, their eyes tracked me as I passed, not with hunger, with a kind of alertness that made me uneasy, like they were guarding something I couldn't see. One night, a storm rattled the keep. Rain hammered the stones so hard it sounded like the kingdom itself was trying to break free. A servant girl slipped in with a bowl meant for me. Her hands were shaking. She whispered that she'd seen Kyle Tharos' captain pull someone from a corridor, someone dragged by the wrists, blood marking the floor like a trail of confession. Who? I asked. She swallowed. I don't know. But I heard your name. Like they were arguing about you. My throat tightened. The next morning, I found Marowyn in the herb room. I didn't recognize her at first. She wore traveling leathers, stained with mud and smoke. Her hair was braided tight, and her eyes had the look of someone who'd watched too many people die, and still decided to wake up anyway. When she met my gaze, she didn't smile. She nodded once, like she'd come to deliver a fact. "Princess," she said. My ribs went cold. No one called me that anymore in public. The soldiers called me captive. The court called me property. The servants called me my lady only when they were desperate. Marwyn said it as if she was naming a weapon. "I'm not," I lied. "Not anymore." Marwyn looked past me toward the door, toward the shadows, toward the place where guards might be listening. "You are the last heir," she said softly, "and that is why they keep you alive." I let the word last ring in my head like a bell. "Alive for what purpose?" "For leverage," she answered, "or for a curse." My skin prickled. She stepped closer and set a small pouch on the counter. Inside were dried seeds and a strip of grey cloth stained with wax. "These belong to your bloodline," she said. "The ones who came before you carried something that doesn't die when the kingdom does." "What is it?" Marwyn's gaze flicked to my collarbone where the crescent scar lived under my shirt collar. "It isn't a sword," she said. "It's a promise. Hidden, waiting." I should have dismissed her. I should have treated it like another rumor dressed up in fear. But I couldn't, because my nightmares had started to feel like memories, and my instincts had started to feel like knowledge. Sometimes when I reached for herbs, my fingers knew which ones to choose before my mind did. Sometimes when I cleaned a wound, the pain in my own body responded as if I could absorb it. It had always been small, unexplainable, easy to ignore. Now, it felt like a door I didn't know I'd been touching. Marwyn leaned in and spoke like she didn't want the walls to hear. "Cael'theros didn't just conquer your land," she said. "He took something from your throne room. And what he took was never meant to be in his hands." My breath caught. "What did he take?" Marwyn's face tightened. "The mark that proves you're not only born, you're chosen." The next week became a cage with different bars. A month after conquest, the court's mood soured. The new king's officers drank more and slept less. Their patience thinned with every rumor that leaked between the halls. Then, one evening, a servant stumbled into the kitchens with a broken basket and a panicked stare. She said, "Guards accuse someone of poisoning food." My hands moved before my mind caught up. I grabbed the bowl, checked the herbs, tasted the broth with the careful patience of someone who had learned how not to die. It wasn't poison. It was bitterness from bad storage, something else entirely. He cared about a scapegoat. He cared about showing power. He cared about keeping the castle calm by making someone else take the blame. When they dragged me in, my stomach turned to rope. The court gathered. Ornate chairs, new banners, stolen jewels, gleaming like taunts. The old healers stood stiff as if their bones had been nailed into place. Cael'theros was not in the room. That should have comforted me. It didn't. If he wasn't here, it meant they were acting without restraint. The captain held up a vial. "Princess Vespera," he announced, using my name like it was a chain. "We found this hidden in your stores." The servants gasped. I didn't recognize the vial. I didn't touch it. I stared at it and felt something inside my chest twist, not into anger, into grief. Because betrayal always looks like certainty to the person doing it. They were sure I'd done it. They needed me to be guilty. In a conquered kingdom, guilt was the excuse that kept the conqueror clean. The captain waved his hand. Guards seized me, my breath hitched, and I forced myself to stay steady. I wasn't passive. I was strategic. If I ran, they'd call me guilty. If I fought, they'd call me dangerous. So I did the only thing I could do that kept me in control. I looked at Marwyn. She stood in the back, face unreadable. She didn't plead. She didn't flinch. She watched as if she already knew how the story ended. Then, the door at the far end of the hall opened. The air changed. Every candle flame leaned as though drawn toward a wind that didn't exist. His presence didn't announce itself with sound. It announced itself with gravity. His wolves, silent and massive, flowed behind him, like shadow-given teeth. When they saw me, their heads lifted, their attention fixed with a focus that made my skin tighten. Kael'tharas's gaze landed on the vial. Then it moved to my face. He didn't need to speak for the court to remember fear. His beast was awake. I could feel it in the way the air held its breath. The captain bowed too quickly. "Your Majesty, we—" Kael'tharos cut him off with a look. His wolves stepped forward, one paw at a time, not to attack but to close the distance between me and the men who wanted me broken. The beast inside him pressed outward. The pack's instincts made a wall. The captain's voice stumbled. "Your Majesty, she—" Kael'tharos said nothing. He simply moved closer. As he passed, I felt the scent of rain and iron like battle after the storm had decided to keep going. He stopped in front of me. His eyes didn't soften. They sharpened. "What do you smell?" he asked. Not to me. To the guards holding me. One of them swallowed. "Steel and bitterness," Kael'tharos murmured. His gaze flicked to the vial again. "Not poison." "Storage rot." The captain went pale. "How do you know?" he demanded too loud. Kael'tharas's mouth twitched, almost disdainful, because wolves don't lie about their instincts. The court stared. The captain's cheeks tightened. "But we found it in her stores." Kael'tharos's wolves shifted, and one lowered its head close to my collarbone, as if the air there could answer. Heat rushed to my skin. Then, softly it felt like it came from my bones. Kael'tharos spoke. "Let her go." The captain hesitated. The Alpha King's beast moved first. The pack surged forward with a restraint that frightened even the brave. Guards loosened their grip. My wrists still tingled from the pressure, but I was free. For a heartbeat, I wanted to believe. Then the twist landed. Kael'tharos didn't free me for mercy. He freed me like you pull a blade out of a fire before it burns the hand. He turned toward the captain and ordered, "Exile her." The word exile rang through the room like chains dropping. Marowyn's gaze snapped to mine, warning sharp as wire. The captain bowed. "As you command." I stared at Kael'tharos, stunned. "Exile." My voice trembled despite my effort. I kept my posture straight because I refused to fall apart in front of them. Kael'tharos looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, quiet enough that only the wolves and I could hear, "You are dangerous to them. And you are too valuable to me to use here." My stomach twisted. If I was dangerous, it meant I wasn't simply a scapegoat. If I was valuable to him, it meant conquest hadn't been the only theft. They marched me out of the throne room with the same formality they used to lock a door. No trial, no execution, just the boundary between conquered and outcast. They delivered me to the border in a winter skirt and a cloak that had once been royal before conquest gnawed it into scraps. The last sound behind me was laughter, someone celebrating that the problem had been moved out of their sight. Outside the walls, the land was cruel. The conquered kingdom didn't stop being haunted simply because I crossed a line. I walked through snow that swallowed footsteps. I walked until my legs shook with exhaustion. I kept going because stopping felt like accepting death. When night fell, I found ruins, broken pillars of what had once been a guard station. I curled behind them, wrapping myself in the cloak and trying to ignore how hungry my stomach was. My power, if it was truly mine, was not a weapon for raids. It was a slow thing. It arrived when I did the right care. So I did something ordinary. I took my last strip of cloth and cleaned a cut that had reopened on my thigh from days of walking. I hummed as I worked, because the hum steadied me. The world smelled like cold stone. Then, another scent threaded through it, warm fur. Moon, wet, earth, pack. A rustle sounded nearby. I froze. I had been exiled. I should have been alone. I lifted my head and saw them, wolves prowling through the ruins, like they belonged to the night. Their eyes glinted. Their bodies moved with the smooth precision of creatures built to hunt and protect. None of them lunged. Instead, one carried something in its mouth. A bundle. It dropped it at my feet. I stared. Inside the bundle was bread still warm, impossibly so, and a small pouch of herbs. Someone had planned this. I should have refused. But my hands trembled as I reached forward. The scent hit me with familiarity, the herb mixture I used to slow infection. My throat tightened. It wasn't rescue. Not yet. It was bait. I didn't eat right away. I examined the herbs first, crushing one between my fingers and smelling for the rot that would have meant poison. It was safe. Someone wanted me alive. But why? A shadow moved behind the wolves. Coincidental emerged from the dark like a decision the night had made. His presence made the air heavy. His cloak was damp with snowmelt, but he didn't look cold. "You were told to leave," he said. I rose carefully, wincing as my cut protested. "And you chose to follow." Coincidental's jaw tightened. His wolves pressed closer, forming a half-moon around me. His beast was close enough that I could feel its attention crawling over my skin. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You exiled me." He didn't answer directly. That was his kind of honesty. Unfinished, dangerous. "I did," he admitted. "Because if I kept you within the walls, they would use your bloodline like a weapon against you." I stared at him. "You don't get to decide what's dangerous and then leave me to die." Coincidental's gaze flicked to my bandaged thigh. He studied how I dressed it, not the wound itself, the way I handled it, like he was reading my hands. "What did you do to that cut?" he asked. I held his gaze. "What I have always done." "No," he said low. "It's not only care. It's something else." My heart pounded. My humming earlier wasn't only for myself. I'd always felt the sound land deeper than my own breath, like it touched a place underneath my skin. Marowyn's words came back to me. Promise hidden waiting. Coincidental stepped closer. His wolves didn't stop him, but they watched me, like I was both answer and threat. "Let me see your collarbone," he said. I flinched before I could stop it. His eyes sharpened, not in anger, but in restraint. "Not to take," he said. "To confirm," I swallowed. In the past months, I had learned that men with power could steal without touching. Coincidental felt different, still dangerous, still intimidating, but there was a discipline in him that refused to cross certain lines. I lifted my collar slightly and showed the crescent scar. Coincidental stared at it. His beast shifted under his skin, reacting like an animal to scent. The air vibrated. Wolves lowered their heads. Something in Coincidental changed. Not affection, not pity, recognition. "What is it?" I demanded. He didn't look at me. He looked at the scar as if it held a map. "This isn't only a mark," he said. "It's the proof of a line I hunted without knowing why." My stomach turned. "You hunted?" He finally met my eyes. His gaze was heavy enough to crush a promise. "I conquered your kingdom because the thing on your throne was stolen from mine first," he said. "A relic, a seal, a reason for wars that never belonged to me." I felt dizzy. "So you destroyed us for something that was taken from you?" Coincidental's mouth tightened. "Yes and no." The cruelty came from inside me, long before it had a target. That honesty frightened me more than his teeth. He could admit his darkness. What scared me was that he wasn't trying to hide it. Marowyn stepped out from the ruins behind him. I hadn't heard her approach. She looked at Keeltharos with a kind of weary acceptance. "You came late," she said to him. Keeltharos didn't flinch. "I came when I was needed." Marowyn's gaze snapped to me. "And she came as she always would." My pulse hammered. "As who?" "As what?" Marowyn drew a breath and spoke like she'd carried this truth for too many nights. "Vespera," she said, and this time the name didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a key. "Your kingdom wasn't only a place, it was a ward." The relic that Keeltharos stole was meant to keep something asleep. "What?" I asked, voice breaking. Marowyn's eyes glistened. "A hunger older than kings. It wears men like crowns. It convinces conquerors they're chosen." Keeltharos's wolves snarled, not at her, at the words. Keeltharos's hand tightened into a fist. "Stop." Marowyn didn't stop. "The ward needed an heir," she said. "Not a warrior, not a soldier, an ordinary caretaker with the right blood." My hands curled. I didn't want prophecy. I wanted truth. "If it needed an heir," I said slowly, "why did they blame me? Why did they exile me?" Marowyn's gaze turned hard. "Because the men who profit from chaos found your mark. They knew you weren't dead inside the keep. They wanted you gone before the relic called you." Keeltharos stared at the snow, like he was seeing a memory he tried to forget. "You didn't know," Marowyn said to him. "That is why you're still standing." Keeltharos's attention returned to me. "Neither did I." He said, "But my beast knows when something is meant to be protected." His voice wasn't romantic, it wasn't soft, but the wolves around me shifted, and their movements translated something he didn't know how to give. Protection, a choice. I should have stepped away. If I allowed this, if I believed, it would make betrayal hurt more. Instead, I did what I always did when fear tried to control me. I worked. I sat on the snow behind the ruins and pulled out what I had left. Needle, thread, cloth. My hands moved with calm determination. Keeltharos watched. He didn't interrupt. He didn't demand. His beast paced a short distance away, as if restless, not for me to submit, but for the world to stop threatening what I was building with my care. I bandaged my thigh properly this time. The hum rose from my throat again, not as pleading but as grounding. After I finished, I looked up. "What do you want?" I asked. Keeltharos's eyes darkened. "To bring you somewhere safe." I shook my head once. "Safe for who?" "For you." His jaw tightened. "I can't keep you," he said at last. The words struck like a slap. I blinked throat tight. Keeltharos continued, quieter. "If I bring you back within reach of the court, your enemies will find you. If I leave you alone, I'll be hunting guilt until it eats me." My chest tightened. He sounded like a man fighting himself. I didn't like that, I understood. "Then what?" I asked. Keeltharos gestured toward the forest path beyond the ruins. "Come with me," he said. "Not into the castle, not into their hands, into my territory." Forced proximity. The phrase should have disgusted me, but the wolves had already been there. His pack didn't feel like a cage, it felt like a boundary drawn to keep someone alive. Still, I didn't trust him. Not yet. Trust takes time. Time takes evidence. So I asked, "How do I know you won't use me next?" Keeltharos's eyes sharpened. "You already know what I stole." I stared, confused. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I stole a relic," he said, "but I didn't know it would choose you." My skin prickled. "Choose?" Keeltharos's wolves shifted, and the scent of rain and iron deepened. The beast inside him pushed forward, and I felt it like a hand on my thoughts. Not mind control, not possession, a pull Like the relic's hidden promise recognized its match. A warning rose in my chest, but it came with heat. I didn't want anything. I didn't want to be the last heir in someone else's war. But the truth I'd carried for weeks about my hands, knowing, about my humming, meaning more than comfort, made me realize this wasn't only his choice. It was destiny pressing down. I stood. My thigh throbbed as I put weight on it, but I refused to show pain. "I'll go," I said, "but you don't get to command me." Cael'Tharis's mouth twitched, something like approval trying to escape and failing. "My pack will follow your lead," he said. The wolves pressed forward at his words. I watched their behavior carefully. They were not wild animals thrown into chaos. They were disciplined. They were choosing to trust me, without words, without begging. So I walked with them into the forest. They didn't escort me like captives. They escorted me like kin. As days turned into a week, my strength returned. The forest gave me what the castles stole: space to breathe. Cael'Tharis kept his distance at first. He appeared near camp at dawn and watched as I tended wounds me own. Then others, not bandits, not soldiers, wolves. Sometimes a pup would limp in, hiding its injury under a careless swagger. I noticed how it tried to act brave. I sat by the den entrance and hummed. I offered salve and warmth and steady hands. I didn't have to reach for them aggressively. The pup would come closer if my voice stayed calm. And always, Cael'Tharis watched from farther back than he needed to. When he left offerings, meat wrapped in leaves, fresh water in a carved stone basin, I pretended not to notice. He pretended not to notice me. Noticing. It was a strange, slow dance. He didn't speak about feelings. His beast didn't speak either. But the pack's behavior did. When I stepped away from camp for herbs, wolves moved in a loose ring to make sure I didn't come back empty-handed. When night grew cold, one of his larger wolves curled near my fire without blocking me from standing. When I bandaged a skinned shoulder for a wolf that had scraped it against a root, Cael'Tharis's gaze softened by a fraction. Not enough to call it affection, enough to call it change. Then the betrayal returned in a new form. Marowyn warned me one evening while rain hissed against leaves. "They're coming," she said. I tightened my grip on the needle. "Who?" Marowyn's face turned grim. "The men who blamed you, the captain. He didn't exile you to remove you from the story. He exiled you to isolate you, so the relic can be taken again." My stomach dropped. "So what happens when they take it?" Marowyn's eyes flickered. "The hunger awakens. It devours the one who carries the ward's promise." Cael'Tharis stepped into the ring of light, then silent. His wolves growled low. Marowyn looked at him sharply. "You must decide." Cael'Tharis's jaw clenched. I decided the moment I recognized her scar. My breath caught. Neither of them spoke the words that mattered. Recognized her as the match the relic had been waiting for, because neither of them wanted to believe in destiny when destiny had already ruined so much. The next day, the betrayal arrived. Wearing court colors, men with polished armor, banners stolen from my home, and smiles made to look kind. They approached with the confidence of people who believed the world had agreed with their lies. "Princess!" the captain called, voice carrying. "Come with us! The king will restore what was taken." My hands tightened. I didn't move at first. I didn't confront them. I listened. When they stepped closer, I smelled something wrong. Not poison, not rot. A metallic sweetness that made my head swim. Cael'Tharis's wolves shifted, bristling. The captain smiled wider. "See? The Alpha King tolerates you because you're useful. So why keep playing at being free?" My heart pounded. If they'd brought the relic's poison, they weren't only here to take me. They were here to trigger the ward's response, to force the hunger awake. Marowyn's hands hovered near her belt where a small blade sat, but she didn't draw it. "They don't want her captured gently," she said. "They want her marked and claimed." My throat went tight. Cael'Tharos stepped forward, finally closing the distance between threat and camp. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply commanded with his presence. His wolves surged forward, not to kill first, but to cut off retreat and crush their confidence. The captain's men reached for weapons. Cael'Tharos's pack didn't wait for him to say more. I stood behind his shadow and watched, heart racing. I refused to fight. Not because I was weak, because my agency wasn't in blades, it was in what I could do without being forced to spill blood. One of the captain's soldiers stumbled toward the camp where the wolves had scattered the supplies. He was holding a case metal and glass sealed with wax. The metallic sweetness thickened. The ward's promise inside me flared. I felt it like a heartbeat, answering a drum. My body moved before fear could stop it. I picked up a basin of water from the fire pit and poured herbs into it. Herbs I'd gathered in the forest. Their smell was sharp, bitter, cleansing. The soldier sneezed mid-step, face twisting. He tried to stop, but his eyes watered too much. He dropped the case. It cracked open. The relic's poison spilled out like liquid shadow. Cael'Tharos's wolves snapped at it instantly, but their jaws recoiled as if the substance could burn them. It wasn't meant for teeth. It was meant for bodies, for the promise. The hunger inside it recognized the scar on my collarbone. It tried to call me. My stomach lurched. I gagged, not from poison in my mouth, but from the invisible pull in my bones. Marowyn shouted something, but it sounded far away. I realized the truth too fast. The ward wasn't only protection. It was an invitation. And someone had brought a key made to turn that invitation into destruction. The captain stepped closer, triumphant. "See? It wakes for her. Now. Take her." I couldn't breathe. I could feel the hunger press against my ribs, pushing for the moment it could swallow me whole. But I didn't let it. I did what my hands had always done. I healed. I reached down to the spilled shadow and forced my fear into my hum. My voice rose steady, clear, over the crackle of the fire. Cael'Tharos turned his head sharply. His beast was watching me, like I was either a cure or a sacrifice. The metallic sweetness recoiled slightly when my hum deepened. It didn't disappear. It fought back. I felt cold in my veins, like winter trying to crawl into my lungs. Marowyn grabbed my shoulder. "Vespera, stop! You'll—" "Not yet," I whispered. I tightened my fingers on the herbs and water, mixing them by instinct. The mixture hissed and rose in a thin steam. The steam smelled like wet earth and crushed leaves, like the forest waking. I poured it over the shadow at my feet. It sizzled. Then something shocked happened. Instead of burning away, the shadow pulled inward, dragged toward my scar like it wanted to settle. I staggered. My body trembled. The hunger didn't vanish. It merged. And for a breath, I saw something through the inside of my skull. A throne room under torchlight, my hands placing a relic into a cradle, a promise sealed with blood and song, a crown turning into ash as a man swore revenge, not Cael'Tharos. Someone else, someone with the captain's face, a betrayal within betrayal. The man had used my bloodline as bait against Cael'Tharos. So my suffering would guarantee Cael'Tharos's rage would finish what the ward was meant to prevent. My throat tightened. I hadn't only been falsely accused, I had been targeted as the keystone to open a door to something worse than conquest. I collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. Cael'Tharos was suddenly at my side. His wolves formed a protective barricade around us. He didn't touch my scar. He touched my shoulder, firm, grounding. "Breathe with me," he said. I blinked at him. His voice didn't command. It anchored. I tried to pull away. Not because I didn't need him, because needing him felt like stepping into another trap, but his beast stayed calm. It didn't demand, it simply remained. The captain's men retreated when they saw the shadow sizzle away. Realizing the ward wasn't powerless, they hadn't expected me to heal without a blade. When the last of them fled, the forest fell into a tense quiet. Caeltharos knelt slightly to level his gaze with mine. His eyes were dark with restraint. His beast shifted, impatient, not with me, but with what had been done to me. "You didn't die," he said. I swallowed, because I refused. Caeltharos held my gaze for a long moment. Then, in a voice that felt like a vow not yet ready to be spoken, he said, "I will not exile you again." My chest tightened. "You don't get to decide what my life is." Caeltharos's mouth curved faintly, like he'd expected me to say that. And slowly, like he was breaking his own chains, he stood up and offered me his cloak. Not as a command, as an option. I took it and stood with effort. My strength was returning in pieces. Not all at once, but enough. Marowyn approached and looked between us. "Now we go back," she said. Caeltharos stiffened. "Back? To the keep?" Marowyn nodded. The captain set a trap inside the court. If the relic is meant to choose the heir, it will do it where it belongs, on the throne. My stomach turned. Throne room meant my past. It meant accusation. It meant what I had endured. But now I carried more than pain. I carried knowledge. I carried the ward's promise inside me, humming under my skin, and I didn't want to be rescued like a doll. I wanted to reclaim. So when Caeltharos asked, "Can you walk?" I didn't ask permission. I answered with action. I walked. The journey back through the conquered land was different. The castle's smoke still rose in familiar shapes, but the air around it felt thinner, like the walls were nervous. His wolves didn't prowl randomly anymore. They watched doors. They listened to lies. They moved like guardians. When we reached the outer courtyard, the sentries stared. Some looked afraid of Caeltharos, some looked hopeful. And one, an officer with the captain's arrogance, smiled like he expected me to kneel. I didn't. I entered the keep on my feet. My hands were steady, not because I didn't tremble, but because I refused to let trembling decide for me. Caeltharos moved beside me, close enough that I felt his heat through his shadow. Not touching, not restraining, just present. In the throne room I smelled the old corruption. The same metallic sweetness clung to the air, stronger now. The captain stood near the dais, pretending calm. When he saw me, his smile brightened. "Princess," he purred, "we've waited for you." My throat tightened. This was the final cruelty, pretending they were partners in my story. Caeltharos stepped forward. The wolves behind him snarled softly. The captain lifted a hand. "Your Majesty, you must." Caeltharos cut him off without raising his voice. "My wolves smelled. Lies in my own keep," he said. "That means someone fed them." The captain's eyes flickered. He didn't expect Caeltharos to connect the betrayal to a ritual. He expected Caeltharos to punish the wrong thing. He expected my exile to make me forget my power. Instead, I stepped into the center of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I hummed. The sound rose through the stained air, and the relic's promise inside me answered like a door recognizing its key. The throne room lights flickered, candles bent as if drawn by a wind. The captain's smile wavered. "Stop," he hissed. But it sounded like fear trying to disguise itself as command. Marowyn appeared at my side, close enough to support if I fell. Caeltharos stood behind us like a shield made of stone and night. I walked to the dais. My boots echoed. The throne seat looked ordinary carved wood, gilded edges, a relic mount at the center. But my scar heated. The ward inside me tugged, not toward pain but toward purpose. I placed my hand on the relic mount. The metal under my palm pulsed. For a breath, I saw the past again, blood sealing a promise, a man smiling as he stole more than an object. Then the truth tore itself free. The relic's glow flared not around the throne, but toward the captain, revealing the hidden binding etched into his own bloodline, his skin darkened with runes. He staggered as if the curse finally recognized its handler. He'd used my name to open the door. He'd framed me because he needed me to carry the invitation. But I was not only an invitation, I was a lock. My humming deepened. The runes on the captain's body flared, and then collapsed inward like ash. He collapsed with a hoarse sound, no longer triumphant. The court gasped. They didn't know what they'd witnessed, only that the story they believed had died. Cael'thas's wolves stood perfectly still, their attention sharpened on the captain's downfall. The Alpha King turned his gaze on the court, not with cruelty, but with a warning, so absolute it made men reconsider every lie they'd ever sold. The captain tried to crawl away. Cael'thas didn't strike him. He simply spoke a sentence of removal from power, not death, not spectacle, just exile from the story. The court understood punishment by how quickly the room emptied. When the guards dragged the captain away, the throne room felt hollow. Only Cael'thas, Marowyn, and me remained. I stared at the relic mount. The glow slowly dimmed. My scar cooled. I could feel the ward's promise settle inside my blood, no longer screaming for survival, but humming for protection. Cael'thas approached carefully, as if he was afraid I'd break. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted him to apologize for exile, for conquest, for everything done in his shadow, but my anger didn't know where to land, now that truth had been revealed. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Who am I to you? Cael'thas's beast stirred under his skin, and his wolves leaned forward slightly, as if they needed his answer to become real. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at my scar, he looked at my hands, he looked at the way I stood without trembling. Then he said, "My ward's heir." I swallowed. "And the princess you destroyed?" Cael'thas's jaw clenched. I didn't know. The words were not enough, but they were also not a lie. So I nodded slowly, granting him room to be imperfect. "Then make it right," I said. Cael'thas's eyes sharpened. "I will," he promised. Marowyn stepped back, satisfied as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Then she spoke the final twist, the truth that would reframe everything. Cael'thas had not only stolen my kingdom, the relic's seal had been meant to keep him human. When he conquered, he broke the seal. The hunger inside him had been feeding ever since, making him cold, making him ruthless, making him believe vengeance was the only path. But the ward didn't only protect the heir, it protected the conqueror. It balanced a curse. And now that I carried the ward's promise properly again, Cael'thas's beast could finally rest. His wolves whined softly, as if they'd been holding their breath for years. Cael'thas stared at me, like I'd become something both terrifying and precious. I realized then that my exile had been part of a cruel ritual attempt, but it hadn't succeeded. My humming had, my care had, my agency had. And now his walls were starting to come down, not in one dramatic collapse, but in slow, deliberate shifts. He stopped, standing behind me. He stopped, letting his beast speak for him. He lowered himself to my level and offered his hand, not as a claim, but as a choice. I placed my fingers on his palm. His skin was warm, scarred, real. His beast exhaled, and the air around us loosened. For the first time since conquest, I didn't feel like a prisoner. I felt like a partner. When I looked up, Cael'thas's gaze was no longer a command. It was an invitation. I could have refused. I could have walked away from a man who had destroyed my home. But destiny had pressed too hard for too long, and now my heart recognized the truth before my mind could argue. He was not only the conqueror, he was also the broken thing inside my story that needed healing. And healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant choosing what came next. So I stepped closer. Cael'Tharos didn't pull me, he didn't force. He simply stood with his wolves at our sides, forming a living boundary between me and the world. Marowyn murmured something about vows and wards, about how a queen doesn't only rule, it protects. I understood. We had both been wrong. He had conquered the wrong enemy. I had been blamed for crimes someone else created. Now, the truth had burned away the lie. Cael'Tharos and I walked out of the throne room together, not as conqueror and captive, as heir and king bound by the same promise. The court watched, stunned. Some bowed, some looked angry, some looked relieved. But the wolves stayed close, and their calm made it impossible to pretend this wasn't happening. As we entered the moonlit courtyard, the air shifted again, like the world knew we were crossing into a new story. Cael'Tharos stopped beside a stone fountain where the old kingdom's water once symbolized purity. He dipped his fingers into the stream and touched the water to his lips, a ritual of restraint. Then he offered the water to me. I drank. It tasted like cold spring and second chances. Cael'Tharos's beast moved softly behind his ribs, satisfied but not possessive. He leaned down and rested his forehead against mine. Not a dramatic gesture, not a claim, a vow, spoken without words. My heart clenched with a mixture of pain and relief. I didn't forgive conquest instantly. I didn't trust his world overnight. But the walls between us were not stone anymore. They were thin wood, slowly splintering. And in the quiet after betrayal, I felt my power settle into me like a crown that didn't need a throne. When Cael'Tharos finally addressed the court, his voice carried authority without cruelty. He declared me warded heir, protector of the realm, not his property, not a tool, a chosen partner. His wolves howled once, low and reverent. The sound echoed through the conquered grounds. I stood straighter than I ever had in my old palace, because I wasn't broken anymore, I was remade. And Cael'Tharos's beasties, terrifying, quiet guardians stayed beside me through every future that tried to take what was mine. Together, we rebuilt what conquest ruined. Together, we turned an ending meant to be a curse into a beginning meant to be a bond. In the last light of the night, as the courtyard lamps flickered and the pack circled like constellations, I finally believed the destiny pressing down on us didn't have to hurt. It could heal. And it did.